What happens after or instead of these medications? When people discontinue GLP-1 medication, weight regain is common. And in fact, this is usually what happens. And it's often faster. That weight regain is faster than after traditional diet-based weight loss. Unless habits have shifted. People can experience increased hunger signals, cravings. This is basically like you can't stop thinking about food. You're having cravings about food. You feel like you're always hungry, dysregulated appetite, and you could possibly get more emotional eating triggers. This isn't moral failing or failing at willpower. It's biology. Welcome to the Wellness That Fits podcast, where we help busy moms eat well, restore energy, and clear brain fog without sacrificing family time or your sanity. I'm Cassie, registered dietitian and mom of 3. I believe wellness should fit your real life, not the other way around. If you're tired of complicated wellness trends and want simple, sustainable strategies for meal prep, holistic nutrition, and time-saving routines, you're in the right place. Let's jump in. Hey guys, welcome back to the Wellness That Fits podcast, where we dive into the science behind health solutions and how they apply to real women living real lives, juggling all the things: work, kids, meals, stress, and everything in between. Today, we're talking about something huge in health conversations right now: GLP-1 medications and peptides. I'm sure you've probably heard about drugs like Ozempic, Wegovy, Mounjaro, Zepbound, and even that first oral version of Semaglutide just approved. Lots of buzz, lots of questions. So I wanted to address some of them today. So what are these really? We're going to be talking about who needs them, who's using them for other reasons, what can they do in the body, and most importantly, where does nutrition come in? How can we support our bodies, whether we're on or off these medications, and why working with a dietitian matters before, during, and after these medications. So this is part 1 of 2 episodes talking all about GLP-1s and the nutritional implications. So now today, we're first going to break down the science, and we're going to use science, not hype, of course, but we're also going to use compassion for your life and for the decisions that you've made thus far. So let's get into it. First, we're going to talk about what are GLP-1s and peptides. These are not magic drugs. They're biologically inspired. What does that mean? GLP-1 stands for glucagon-like peptide 1, and it's a hormone that our gut makes naturally when we eat. It tells the pancreas to release insulin, it slows down digestion, and it signals fullness to the brain. It's called an incretin hormone, so it helps control blood sugar and appetite. But natural GLP-1, meaning GLP-1 that our body naturally creates, is short-lived. Your body breaks it down really fast. So that native GLP-1 or the GLP-1 that our body makes has a very short half-life of 1 to 2 minutes, which limits its therapeutic uses. And that's where GLP-1 receptor agonists come in. Now, really quickly, if you remember any biology lessons from the past, agonists, that's something that is going to enhance the effect, or in this case, it's going to mimic the effects of natural GLP-1. So a GLP-1 receptor agonist is going to mimic the effects. Whereas an antagonist, if you remember again from biology, that's something that is going to either stop or slow down the effect of something. So that's where we have GLP-1 receptor agonists. They are modified versions designed to last longer and activate the same receptors in your body as natural GLP-1. So they behave like your own GLP-1, but they live longer in your bloodstream. And so they're going to be influencing appetite and glucose regulation usually over a week versus minutes, which your body naturally does. So most people on these drugs are getting a weekly injection, and thus those therapeutic benefits are lasting usually a week or maybe a little bit longer. Now, this is a key difference. So our natural hormone comes and goes quickly, that our natural GLP-1 comes and goes quickly, while the man-made versions persist in our body to have those therapeutic effects. These drugs are classified as receptor agonists because, like I said before, they mimic the hormone more reliably, but they're not identical to the small bursts that your gut produces after a balanced meal. So our guts are producing little increments here and there, right? All right, why does this matter? Natural GLP-1 works through food, triggers, and a healthy gut. Synthetic versions are engineered for lasting effects by design. So they are made to mimic the effects, but to last longer. And they influence the gut-brain axis differently because they're stable and they're continuous, not momentary or, lasting for a couple minutes. Okay, so let's talk about who's taking GLP-1s, and we're going to talk about more of the medical versus cosmetic or vanity side of the people taking GLP-1s. So who's actually using GLP-1 medications? On the medical side, these drugs were first approved for type 2 diabetes back in the early 2000s because they improve blood sugar control and they reduce cardiovascular risk factors over time. According to the CDC, about 26.5% of adults with diagnosed diabetes report using a GLP-1 injectable. Beyond diabetes, GLP-1 drugs are approved or commonly prescribed for obesity or overweight with weight-related health conditions. So usually obesity or overweight with weight-related health conditions. Data suggests that prescription rates for overweight and obesity diagnosis have increased dramatically. For example, more than 580% increase since 2019. About 12% of U.S. adults report having ever used a GLP-1 at some point in their lives, according to the results from a KFF, it's a Kaiser Family Foundation poll that involved about 1,500 respondents. This includes the 6% of people currently using a GLP-1 agonist, such as semaglutide. That's more so the GLP-1 prescribed for medical necessity or people who need help metabolically, right? So those diabetes or overweight or obesity group. Now, there's another group, people using GLP-1 medications primarily for weight loss or cosmetic reasons, and sometimes even off-label. A survey among clinicians showed that many who prescribe GLP-1s for aesthetic weight loss also took them themselves, often for body image reasons. And we're going to get into body image and the use of GLP-1s a little bit more in part 2 of this episode, or this series of episodes, I should say. Okay, so polling data also show that about 1 in 8 U.S. adults report currently taking a GLP-1 drug either to lose weight, treat a chronic condition, or both. And women are more likely to be taking them than men. As I was researching, looking at all the research and studies done, whether it's on muscle loss or bone loss or weight loss in general, a lot of the study participants were women in the majority. So again, there's a number of reasons why, but women are more likely to be taking GLP-1s than men. So we have clear medical necessity that we've talked about: diabetes, metabolic disease, obesity with health conditions, and we also have increasing use for weight loss or cosmetic reasons, with the majority of signals trending toward weight management uses rather than glucose-only uses. Now, we don't have, as I was looking at the research, we don't have perfect nationwide stats on what percentage is purely vanity versus medical need, because many weight loss prescriptions are legitimate, but not necessarily diabetes related. But the trend is clear. There is rising use among both groups. All right, so now that we know who's using it, let's talk about what happens in the body. We're going to talk about the mechanism of action here, not just the outcomes. So these medications work by slowing gastric emptying. What does that mean? It really just means that food is staying in your stomach longer, reducing hunger. So when your stomach is full for a longer period of time, it sends signals to your brain telling you that you are full and no need to eat more. All right, and then the second thing, signaling satiety centers in the brain, and so your appetite drops. So that kind of goes along with slowing that gastric emptying. When food sits longer in the stomach, again, your gut is signaling to your brain that you are full. It signals satiety, that feeling of being full, and then appetite drops. The third thing, it signals insulin secretion and glucose control. So if you're not familiar with it all, your pancreas secretes insulin. Insulin acts as a key to a door, we'll say. Like, let's pretend a cell in your body is the room and a receptor is the door. And so insulin comes by and unlocks that door so that sugar can get into those cells, because your cells in your body do need sugars, right, to run various processes. So we need insulin when we have glucose or sugar coming in from a meal. We need to have insulin to unlock our cells so that sugar can get into our cells. Okay. So what happens in the body with GLP-1s? It signals insulin to be secreted from the pancreas to go into the bloodstream to then help with glucose control. And this is especially helpful with people who have insulin resistance. Okay. And then the last thing it does is it reduces caloric intake just in general. I guess it's mainly those other three things with slowing gastric emptying, reducing appetite, and signaling insulin secretion. But all of those things kind of put together helps the person reduce calorie intake without willpower alone. And we're going to talk about food noise in a little bit, but we're mostly talking about the mechanism of action right now. Okay, so clinical evidence shows that GLP-1 receptor agonists like semaglutide and tirzepatide lead to significant weight loss over 1 to 2 years compared with placebo. And these effects are sustained as long as the drugs are continued. But weight loss, there's a couple things that we're going to talk about here because we do see that reduction in weight. But there's a couple other things happening too. So there's some muscle, some bone health considerations. And I first want to talk about the muscle loss. So weight loss isn't just like the fat loss, right? Studies are showing that while most of the loss is fat mass, there can be a modest reduction in lean mass, about 20 to 25% of total weight loss. And I was actually looking at an article in The Lancet by Prado et al. That even suggests muscle loss with these GLP-1 medications ranges from 25% to 39% of the total weight loss. And I'll include these references in the show notes. And that's why including resistance training as well as consuming high quality protein are essential to maintain muscle while on these drugs. We'll talk a little bit more about nutrition implications, but I wanted to throw that in there because it is, it's really important that we address some of these things. Like people on GLP-1s oftentimes are not getting the all around care and like treatment plan that can help them sustain this weight loss. And so it's really important to talk about some of these other things that are going to help maintain that weight loss. All right, so that's a little bit on the muscle loss. On bone health, preliminary evidence suggests modest reductions in bone mineral density, similar to what we see with caloric restriction in general, like any other diet where calories are restricted. And it raises the question really about fracture risk if exercise and nutrition aren't optimized. And so basically what that's saying is if you're just taking a GLP-1 and doing nothing else but, taking this drug and you're not really paying attention to nutrition and you don't have a strategy for resistance training or for some form of movement, you could be at risk of lower bone mineral density. And especially if you're a woman postmenopausal who you're already at an increased risk of fractures and lower bone mineral density loss. So just a couple things to consider here as we go through. Okay, so again, this is where nutrition and strength training matter, both for that muscle loss, but also for any loss in bone mineral density. Now, I do want to point out, because I think with the newness of the GLP-1s, even though they've been studied for, since the early 2000s, whatever, there are a lot of studies coming out more specific to, mental health and what else about bone health, because there are some studies that do show some positive things on bone health. So it's really like these preliminary studies are mixed. And so it's just something that we want to keep in mind. It's not an end all be all. The things that I'm saying, it's just what we're seeing in the research at this time. All right, so we covered the muscle mass, we covered the bone health. Now, I want to talk a little bit about what we should do nutritionally speaking, at least for the bone health and for the muscle mass. Adequate protein. I'm sure this is no news to people in general, that no matter, just in general health, right, we need to make sure we're getting enough protein. But also for those who are on GLP-1 medications, where we're seeing that loss in muscle mass or in lean mass in general, lean mass could be, bone, organ, muscles, we want to make sure that we're getting enough protein. We want to make sure that we're getting that resistance exercise. And because really that targeted support can help preserve lean mass and bone strength. We could get into increased bone density with exercise. Of course, that's a positive, beneficial effect of exercise. And it's no different for people who are on GLP-1. So again, something to consider, that nothing changes in terms of this GLP-1 being some kind of magical bullet where you don't have to worry about nutrition or you don't have to worry about exercise. That's not true. We do need to worry about nutrition, not worry. We have to focus on creating a strategy around nutrition so that you can sustain health. Same thing with resistance training and movement. Okay, so the important thing to remember here is that these drugs are metabolic tools, not replacements for nutrition, movement, sleep, stress management, or other lifestyle habits. Okay, why don't we move on to how to boost natural GLP-1 and a little bit on gut health. Now, what if someone wants to support their own body's GLP-1 production instead of or alongside medication? Natural GLP-1 responses are triggered by protein-rich meals, especially leucine-rich foods, fiber-rich foods, especially viscous and fermentable fibers, or let's just call it soluble fibers for now, healthy fats, whole minimally processed foods, and stable blood sugar pattern. So that's not really necessarily a food, right? But it is the timing of food and also the combination of having complex carbohydrates with protein at each of your meals to stabilize blood sugars and eating in a timely fashion. So you're not eating once or twice, once after lunch or around lunchtime and then once at 9 o'clock at night, right? That would not help our bodies promote a stable blood sugar pattern. Now, one thing I want to say about fiber, why this matters so much, when we feed our gut microbes, especially with prebiotic fibers, they produce short chain fatty acids like butyrate, which support gut brain signaling. They reduce inflammation and enhance satiety pathways. What does that mean? It just means that it enhances the signaling of our gut to our brain that we are full and to stop eating. So it helps with appetite. I talk a lot about the gut microbiome feeding the brain. This is one of those mechanisms. So some specific foods to include: legumes, oats, barley. We have some complex carbohydrates here, some whole grains, some other things, leafy greens and cruciferous veggies, nuts and seeds, berries, and apples and other fruits really, and fermented foods for increasing gut diversity and ecology. Okay, lifestyle factors that help natural GLP-1, regular movement, we already talked about that one, adequate sleep, regulating your stress and managing your stress because the cortisol and the insulin release pathway that can really impact it, and GLP-1 production can also impact the insulin secretion, as you understand from the mechanism. Consistent meal patterns, and again, that's more so for blood sugar stabilization. So all of these improve insulin sensitivity and reduce appetite dysregulation without pharmacology or without medications. And something to point out in this area is that, again, with the GLP-1 use, and there's a lot of research out there on GLP-1, but I came across a few that were animal studies that I didn't want to focus a lot of time around, but I do want to just mention at least that I came across a study that looked at like protein and peptides and also phytochemicals like quercetin that can help stimulate the GLP-1 peptide, the GLP-1 naturally, which is very interesting. But again, I don't want to say this is an end-all be-all, but things that promote a generally healthy diet, or a generally healthy lifestyle, like the movement, sleep, regulating stress, eating consistently, eating healthful foods like high protein, high fiber, cruciferous veggies, nuts and seeds, berries, things like that are going to be really important for helping support at least natural GLP-1. Now, again, I want to reiterate this: the science out there and the research that I was looking at, there's still a lot that needs to be done in terms of like really specific foods or specific phytochemicals that can help this process. But I am staying on top of it, as I think it's really important to, because it'll be interesting to see the more studies that come out, if there is anything specifically that we can do to help our natural GLP-1 secretion or creation. Okay, so part 5 really of this all, transitioning off GLP-1s and why dietitian support matters. So I think this is probably one of the most important sections because what happens after or instead of these medications? Now, some studies suggest that when people discontinue GLP-1 medication, weight regain is common. And in fact, this is usually what happens. And it's often faster. That weight regain is faster than after traditional diet-based weight loss, unless habits have shifted. So people can experience, now coming off of GLP-1s, people can experience increased hunger signals, cravings. We're going to talk a little bit more about that food noise. This is basically like you can't stop thinking about food. You're having cravings about food. You feel like you're always hungry, dysregulated appetite, and you could possibly get more emotional eating triggers. Now, this isn't moral failing or failing at willpower. It's biology. So if you've been using GLP-1s, we know that it has a long-term therapeutic effect on the body, which is different than natural GLP-1 that our body makes, which is gone in minutes. And so let's say food noise is living rent-free in your brain, right? And all of a sudden you start taking a GLP-1 and you think you've evicted this giant of like this food noise in your brain, but you come off the GLP-1 and you realize this is really just a sleeping giant. Like this was sleeping rent-free and not necessarily awoke and creating havoc and chaos in your hunger signals and cues. And so we really have to pay attention to this because, again, when you are on a GLP-1, you may experience reduced food noise. However, it is only reducing it for a period of time. As soon as you come off the GLP-1, many people experience that food noise coming back. So again, you're awakening the sleeping giant. Your body honestly is just adjusting hormone signals that were being externally modulated, meaning the GLP-1 prior was modulating those pathways and the signaling. And now if you come off of the medication, your body's getting used to now sending its own hormone signals throughout your body to modulate that whole hunger, satiety, that whole process. So for women especially who tend to be more sensitive to appetite and the stress pathways, this transition can feel really chaotic. And this is where working with a dietitian is essential because what we do is we build sustainable eating strategies that support blood sugar stability, which we already talked about is a huge part of maintaining a good stable blood sugar so that your body just feels better and works better, less stress. We also talk about optimizing protein, fiber, and micronutrients that might be lost when you are eating less, possibly. We integrate resistance training for muscle and bones, or at least reiterate the importance of, and can definitely refer you out to somebody who is exceptionally knowledgeable in that area. We address psychology, identity, and habits, which is kind of like the why behind everything, the why behind why you went on a GLP-1 or why you maybe want to go on a GLP-1 but are hesitating, or maybe why you don't want to go on a GLP-1 and want to handle this naturally and sustainably. I emphasize the science of habit change more so rather than restriction, and how rewiring your gut-brain axis through sustainable biology-based habits leads to a new identity. Someone who is healthy because they are supported by habits that fit their life. I think that's probably the most important thing is when you learn to change your mindset around what you're eating and why you're eating and why you're trying to change your body composition or change your eating habits, really getting down to who you want to become is more important than a number on the scale, some goal that you want to achieve, which of course, like goals are important. It's important to set goals, but the reason for those goals should really be addressing who is the person you want to become. And oftentimes people want to have more energy or, build a legacy, things that are really important to them that aren't necessarily related to a number on a scale or something. So that's why it's really important to talk about the science of habit change and rewiring your brain rather than just pure restriction. So since we're on the topic of sustainable health, let's address something because I feel like this is the heart of the matter. We don't want people swapping one quick fix for another. GLP-1 meds can be life-changing tools for those who need them medically, and they can be part of a broader lifestyle approach. But if someone uses them without addressing nutrition, lifestyle, and psychology, they risk regaining the weight, losing lean muscle mass, feeling out of control around food, or experiencing body image distress. We know GLP-1 drugs suppress appetite, but this can actually create new nutritional challenges. Eating less can mean missing out on essential nutrients and fiber. Eating less and restricting, and not necessarily restricting, but like a lot of people just say they're not hungry, they eat less. Eating less definitely helps you lose weight, right? But eating less can mean missing out on the things that your body needs, the nutrients, the fiber. And that's why I think it's so important to focus on habitual nourishment. What does our body need? The timing of meals and the order of things to ensure that we are signaling that hunger satiety pathway, that gut-brain axis. Understanding, again, hunger signals instead of just constantly putting them off, and then our body ends up not knowing, or our brain, I should say, ends up pushing back the signals of hunger, because when you don't feed your body, you don't feed yourself after hunger signals, your brain starts realizing, wait a second, I must be wrong. Maybe we weren't hungry. Or it turns out where it's dysregulated in the end, and you have extremes of hunger and fullness. So that's just something to keep in mind. I also focus on supporting gut-brain feedback, building confidence in your body, and again, that identity shift from dieting to thriving. So I had mentioned that, going on GLP-1s oftentimes lowers your appetite. What this does is it also lowers your fiber intake. We already, as a nation, don't get enough fiber. Listen to my episode a couple of episodes ago on fiber. And when the majority of Americans, like 90% of Americans, are not getting enough fiber, I mean, you can imagine when a huge amount of people are going on GLP-1s, they're likely not all of a sudden going to change their eating patterns, right? Like they are going to probably continue eating the same, just a little bit less, because they are getting those appetite suppression and reduced hunger signals. And so we're already not getting enough fiber. And so this is so important with many people on GLP-1s to understand the higher need for protein, right, to avoid the lean muscle loss. But they also fail to ensure adequate fiber, usually in their diets, which feeds your gut, which has a profound impact on a ton of bodily processes. I've already discussed the link between gut health and mental disorders in previous episodes. Check those out if you haven't already. But it's just really important. Fiber from fruits and veggies really matter. Not just fruits and veggies, also whole grains and nuts and seeds and any plant-based foods, legumes, beans. Yeah, any of those plant-based foods are really important. And also, soluble fiber can improve how natural GLP-1 works in your body. So this is real sustainable wellness. And yes, it's possible even when life is busy. So I hope I gave you a little clarity today on GLP-1s, not fear or hype, but more so an understanding of what they are, who they help, how they work, and how nutrition and lifestyle shape the whole story. So if you're curious about working one-on-one to build a sustainable, science-based plan, whether you're thinking about or currently on medications or not, check out the link in today's show notes and let's set up a call to talk about what your next step might be. And if you don't want to miss part 2 of this episode, hit that follow button so you won't miss it. Thanks so much for tuning in to today's episode of the Wellness That Fits podcast. I hope you walk away with simple, doable steps you can put into practice right away. If you loved this episode, it would mean the world if you subscribed, left a review, or shared it with another busy mom who could use some encouragement. Until next time, friends, keep creating wellness that fits your life.